You lie awake beneath a thin quilt, and the darkness around you is complete. Not the darkness of a modern room, where streetlights seep through curtains and small electronic lights blink from corners. This is an older darkness, a deeper darkness, the kind that existed before electricity reached into every corner of human life. This is the darkness your ancestors knew intimately. The darkness that wrapped around frontier cabins in the American wilderness of the late 1700s and held them through long winter nights. The cold is the first thing you notice. It presses against your face, the only part of your body exposed to the air, and your breath rises in faint, visible wisps that you cannot see but somehow sense. The quilt covering you is not enough. It was never going to be enough. Beneath it, you wear your day clothes, the same wool and linen you worked in hours ago, because undressing for bed is a luxury this season does not permit. Your children press against you on one side, your spouse on the other, and the warmth where your bodies meet is the most precious resource in this small wooden world. The cabin breathes around you. You can hear it in the small sounds that punctuate the silence. A creak as the roof settles under the weight of snow. A faint whistle where wind finds a gap in the chinking between logs. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse moves with tiny scraping sounds you have learned to ignore because there is nothing to be done about it tonight. Tomorrow, you will check the food stores again. Tomorrow, you will set another trap. But tonight, there is only the darkness and the cold and the slow work of trying to rest. The fire has burned down to embers. You can see their faint orange glow if you turn your head toward the hearth, a soft light that barely reaches the foot of the bed. You made a choice hours ago, a calculation so familiar it required no conscious thought. A roaring fire would consume wood too quickly, and wood represents hours of labor with an axe, hours of hauling and splitting and stacking. Every log has a cost measured in sweat and aching muscles. So you let the fire diminish, let the cabin temperature drop, trusting that the coals will hold until that dark hour before dawn when someone will need to rise and coax the flames back to life. This is not a story of famous battles or sweeping historical events. This is something quieter and more universal. This is the story of how ordinary people navigated the most basic human need, the need for rest when the world offered so little comfort. Before central heating, before insulation, before the thousand small technologies we no longer notice, people found ways to sleep through winters that would seem unbearable to modern sensibilities. They developed strategies and rituals, shared body heat and banked fires, said prayers, and arranged their families in careful configurations, designed to preserve warmth through the darkest hours. Welcome, friend, to a journey through those quiet nights. Tonight we drift backward through time to an era when rest itself was a fragile negotiation with cold, with silence, and with the endless wilderness pressing against fragile wooden walls. If you are listening to these words in the late hours, perhaps already in bed, perhaps letting the gentle rhythm of narration carry you toward sleep, then you are in good company. Many who find these stories listen just this way, allowing history to become a kind of lullaby, educational and soothing in equal measure. Before we continue deeper into this passage through winter's hold on early frontier life, I would like to ask a small favor of you. If you find comfort in these stories, if they help you relax or drift toward peaceful sleep. Consider tapping the like button and subscribing to this channel so these late-night historical journeys can continue to find you when the world grows still. And if you feel moved to share, leave a comment below. Where are you listening from tonight? What time wraps around you now? Some of you rest in the deep hours of night. Others greet the early dawn. And some drift somewhere in between waking and dreaming, that liminal space where history feels almost close enough to touch. Now, if you can, dim the lights around you. Perhaps turn on a soft fan for that gentle background hum that helps some minds settle. Arrange your pillows, pull your blankets close, and let yourself sink into whatever comfort surrounds you. You are about to spend time in a place where comfort was far harder to come by, and there is something valuable in that contrast. Not to make you feel guilty for your warm bed, but to help you appreciate it, and to connect you with the millions of people who came before and found ways to endure what we would find. UNENDURABLE. The cabin around you in this imagined past is perhaps 16 feet by 20 feet. A single room that serves every purpose. Along one wall, the fireplace dominates, its stone or clay structure representing the most permanent and most essential feature of the home. Opposite the bed, where your family clusters together. Between them, a rough wooden table, a few stools, perhaps a spinning wheel or a loom if your family has been here long enough to acquire such things. Hooks on the walls hold clothing and tools. A rifle rests within reach of the bed because the wilderness does not respect locked doors. And there are no locks anyway. The smells of the cabin have become invisible to you through familiarity. But a visitor from the modern world would notice them immediately. Wood smoke that permeates everything, that lives in your clothes and your hair and the very walls around you. The earthy scent of the packed dirt floor, a faint animal smell from the hides and furs used for warmth, from the dog that sometimes sleeps at the foot of the bed. From the residue of the game you butchered and preserved for winter. These smells mean home. They mean survival. They mean human presence holding its ground against the vast indifference of the wilderness. Outside, the wind has picked up. You can hear it moving through the pines. That particular sound like distant water that becomes a kind of music if you let yourself listen without fear. The trees around your small clearing are ancient, were ancient before your grandparents were born, and they will remain long after this cabin has returned to the earth from which it was built. You are a temporary presence here, a small, warm point of consciousness in a landscape that does not know or care about your existence. This knowledge lives somewhere beneath your thoughts, informing everything without ever quite becoming a focused idea. Sleep should come easily. Your body carries the exhaustion of a day filled with physical labor. From first light until darkness fell, there was no pause, no moment when you could simply rest without purpose. Wood to cut, water to haul, animals to tend, food to prepare, clothing to mend, children to watch and teach and keep safe from the 100 dangers that surround a frontier homestead. Your muscles ache. Your hands are rough and crossed with small cuts that never quite heal in the cold. You should fall into sleep like a stone into deep water. But sometimes the mind does not cooperate with the body's exhaustion. Sometimes, like tonight, you lie awake and listen to the wind and think about tomorrow. You calculate how much wood remains in the stack by the door, how long it will last if this cold continues, when you will need to venture out to the larger pile despite whatever weather comes. You think about the children, about the cough the youngest has developed, about whether you have enough dried herbs to make the tea that sometimes helps. You think about spring, still months away, and wonder if you have stored enough food to reach it. These thoughts circle without resolution. There is nothing to be done about them in the darkness. The morning will come, and you will address what can be addressed, and the rest will remain beyond your control, as it has always been. But knowing this does not quiet the mind. The thoughts continue their slow rotation, familiar as the constellations you cannot see through the cabin roof, but know are turning overhead in the frozen sky. So you lie still, careful not to disturb the others, and you breathe. You listen to your children's breathing, that soft rhythm that means safety, that means they are warm enough, that means you have succeeded for another day in keeping them alive. This is the measure of your life now, not accomplishments that will be remembered, not wealth accumulated or fame achieved, but simply this: your children breathing in the darkness, your family gathered close against the cold. Another night endured, another small victory over the wilderness that would reclaim this clearing in a season. If you stopped fighting, the cabin walls around you, rough and imperfect as they are, represent everything you have. Tomorrow we will explore how they were built, what they were made of, why they never quite kept out the cold, no matter how carefully you maintained them. But for now, just feel their presence. They stand between you and the winter night. They hold back the wind, mostly. They create this small space where human warmth can accumulate, where fire can push back the darkness, where a family can sleep pressed together and trust that morning will find them whole. The fire dims another degree. The cold creeps closer, and somewhere in the darkness you finally begin to drift toward building against winter the log cabin as shelter and struggle. The walls around you were raised in desperation and hope, each log representing hours of labor you can scarcely imagine from the comfort of your modern life. To understand how settlers slept, you must first understand what sheltered them, and to understand that, you must picture the building of a frontier cabin from its very beginning, when there was nothing but trees and a family's determination to survive. Imagine arriving in the wilderness in late summer or early autumn. The journey behind you has already been exhausting. Weeks or months of travel by wagon, by foot, by river when waterways allowed. You have carried everything you own to this place. And everything you own is not much. Tools, seeds, a few precious possessions that connect you to the life you left behind. Clothing already wearing thin. Perhaps a Bible, its pages soft from handling, its words a comfort in the long nights along the trail. Now you stand in a forest clearing, or what will become a clearing once you have cut enough trees. The air smells of pine and earth, and the particular sweetness of vegetation that has never known a human footprint. Birds call in voices you do not yet recognize. The light filters through leaves in patterns that seem almost sacred. It is beautiful, this place. It is terrifying. Winter is coming. You can feel it in the shortening days, in the cool edge that has crept into morning air. You have perhaps 8 weeks, perhaps 10 if fortune favors you, before the first serious cold arrives. In that time, you must build a shelter sufficient to keep your family alive through months of weather that will show no mercy to the unprepared. There is no alternative. There is no turning back. There is only the work ahead and the dwindling time to complete it. The first task is selecting trees. Not just any trees will do. You need pines or other softwoods straight enough and long enough to form walls, thick enough to provide some insulation, but not so massive that you cannot move them. Each tree must be felled by hand with an axe, a process that takes anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours depending on the tree's size and your strength and skill. The sound of the axe echoes through the forest, announcing your presence. Chip by chip, the tree gives way. When it falls, the crash seems to shake the earth itself. But felling is only the beginning. Each log must be limbed, the branches removed with careful axework. Then it must be dragged to the building site, a labor that might require horses or oxen if you are fortunate enough to have them, or might require nothing but your own muscles and whatever simple leverage you can devise. A single log suitable for a cabin wall might weigh several hundred pounds. You will need dozens of such logs. The mathematics of this labor are staggering when you pause to calculate them, so you learn not to calculate. You learn to focus on one log at a time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. The building site itself must be chosen with care. You need level ground, or ground that can be leveled without too much effort. You need proximity to water, a spring or stream close enough for daily hauling. You need enough cleared space around the cabin to provide some warning if danger approaches, whether that danger takes the form of wildlife or hostile humans. But you also need to remain close enough to the forest for continued access to timber, both for building and for the endless supply of firewood. That winter will demand. Every choice is a compromise between ideal and possible. The perfect site does not exist, or, if it does, you do not have time to find it. You choose what seems good enough and begin to work, knowing that you will live with the consequences of this decision for years to come. Perhaps for the rest of your life, the logs must be notched at their ends to fit together. This is a skill you may have brought from the old country, or learned from neighbors who arrived before you, or developed through trial and error with results that improve as the walls rise. There are different notching techniques with different advantages. The saddle notch, the dovetail notch, the square notch. Each creates a slightly different joint, a slightly different strength, a slightly different profile where rain and snow might collect or run off. You do the best you can with what you know. Neighbors help. This is understood, expected, part of the unwritten contract that binds frontier communities together. When word spreads that a new family is raising a cabin, men arrive from miles around to offer their labor. They know you will return the favor when they need it. They know that your survival strengthens the community, that one more family in the wilderness means one more household to share the burdens and benefits of frontier life. The cabin raising itself becomes almost festive, a break from isolation, a chance to exchange news and share meals and remember that you are not entirely alone in this vast and indifferent landscape. Together, you raise the walls, log upon log, notched and fitted, the structure growing from the ground upward, 4 walls taking shape, window openings left where light will be needed, a doorway framed with extra care, because this is where you will enter and exit for years to come. The work is hard, but satisfying in a way that few modern labors can match. You can see your progress. You can touch what you have built. By the end of a long day, walls stand where morning found only a foundation. And you sleep that night, exhausted but hopeful. The roof takes longer and requires more skill. You must create a framework of rafters, then cover them with wooden shingles split from logs in a time-consuming process that produces thin, overlapping pieces. Some settlers use bark instead, large sheets peeled from trees and laid in layers. Neither solution is perfect. Both will leak eventually. Both will require maintenance and repair for as long as the cabin stands. But for now, they keep out the worst of the weather, and that is enough. The chinking is perhaps the most frustrating aspect of cabin construction. Between each log, gaps remain where cold air can enter and warm air can escape. These gaps must be filled with whatever materials are available. Moss gathered from the forest floor, clay dug from stream banks and mixed to the right consistency, dried grass or straw, animal hair when it can be spared from other uses. Sometimes combinations of all these, layered and pressed into every visible gap with fingers that grow raw from the work. But here is the heartbreaking truth about chinking. It never stays perfect. The logs themselves are alive with moisture when first cut, and as they dry over months and years, they shrink and shift and twist in ways impossible to predict. Gaps open where none existed. Drafts develop in walls you thought were sealed. The chinking itself can crack and crumble as it dries, especially if the mixture was not quite right or if the weather turns before it has properly cured. You will spend years maintaining chinking, checking for new gaps, pressing in fresh material, fighting a battle against entropy that can never be fully won. The floor in most frontier cabins is simply the earth itself, packed down through use until it becomes hard and relatively smooth. Some settlers lay puncheon floors, logs split in half and laid flat side up. But this requires additional labor and additional lumber that might be better used elsewhere. The dirt floor is practical, easy, and free. It is also cold. The earth beneath your feet conducts heat away from the cabin with patient, inevitable efficiency. In winter, you can feel this cold radiating upward, even through whatever rugs or hides you lay down. A constant chill that makes bare feet impossible and keeps the lower parts of the cabin significantly cooler than the air near the ceiling, where heat rises and accumulates. Windows pose their own challenges. Glass is expensive, fragile, and nearly impossible to transport over rough frontier roads without breaking. Most settlers make do with alternatives. Oiled paper stretched over the window opening allows some light to penetrate while blocking the worst of the wind, though it tears easily and must be replaced frequently. Wooden shutters can be closed against storms but plunge the interior into darkness. Some cabins have no windows at all, relying entirely on the open door for light during the day and candles or firelight after dark. The fireplace or chimney is the most critical feature of the cabin. It must be built with special care because errors here can be catastrophic. A poorly constructed chimney can catch fire, sending the whole cabin up in flames in minutes. A chimney that draws poorly will fill the cabin with smoke, making breathing difficult and leaving soot on everything. A chimney that draws too well will pull heat up and out of the cabin, wasting the precious warmth that fires are meant to provide. Getting the chimney right is part science, part art, and part luck. Most frontier chimneys are built of stone, if suitable stone is available, or of sticks and clay if it is not. The stick and clay chimney, sometimes called a catted chimney, is faster to build but more dangerous, requiring constant vigilance for signs of the clay cracking or the wood beneath beginning to char. Many frontier fires started with chimney failures, a fact that haunted every family that huddled near their hearth through winter nights. By the time the cabin is complete, or complete enough to inhabit, you have invested hundreds of hours of the most physically demanding labor imaginable. Your hands are calloused and scarred. Your back carries an ache that will never fully disappear. But you have a structure. You have walls that stand between your family and the wilderness. You have a roof that sheds most of the rain and snow. You have a fireplace that will hold the flames that mean survival. It is not finished. A frontier cabin is never truly finished. It is a constant project, always needing repair, improvement, attention. Next summer, you will improve the chinking. Next year, you might add a sleeping loft for the children. Someday, if fortune favors you, you might build an addition, a second room, more space for a growing family. But these are dreams for another time. For now, you have shelter. You have done what needed to be done. Winter can come, and you will meet it with walls of your own making. The cabin settles into the night around you, creaking and groaning as the temperature drops, speaking in the voice of wood under stress. You know these sounds now. You know the difference between settling and danger, between the normal voice of your shelter and something that requires attention. The walls hold, the roof holds, the fire burns low in its stone enclosure. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the worry, you feel something like pride. You built this. You and your neighbors and your own two hands built this shelter against the wilderness. Whatever comes, you will face it within walls of your own making. The frontier bedstraw husks, and the architecture of rest the bed beneath you is not what that word suggests to the modern mind. It is a negotiation, a compromise, a collection of whatever softness could be gathered from a hard land. To understand frontier sleep, you must understand what settlers actually lay upon through those long winter nights, and how different it was from anything you have likely experienced in your own life. If your family arrived early enough in the season, if time permitted between all the other urgent tasks of establishing a homestead, someone might have built a bed frame. This would be a simple wooden structure, for posts connected by rails, lashed or pegged together with whatever joinery skills were available. The frame lifted the sleeping surface off the cold ground, a significant improvement that created a small air gap between the earth's chill and the bodies trying to rest. Ropes or leather straps stretched across the frame provided a flexible base, sagging slightly underweight in a way that could be comfortable. If the tension was right or torturous, if it was not, many families had no such frame. Many slept on pallets laid directly on the packed earth floor, a practice that seems almost impossibly uncomfortable to modern sensibilities. The cold radiated up through whatever thin barrier separated body from ground. The hardness of earth offered no give, No cushioning for hips and shoulders, and all the pressure points that complained through the night. Yet this was normal. This was simply how many people slept. And the human body adapted, as it always has to, whatever conditions survival required. The mattress itself, whether laid on a frame or directly on the floor, was a tick. This was a large sack made of rough cloth, canvas, or homespun linen, sewn together and stuffed with whatever filling materials the land provided. The filling determined everything about how the mattress felt, how warm it kept you, how long it lasted before needing to be emptied and restuffed. Straw was the most common filling in grain-growing regions. After the wheat or oat harvest, the stalks that remained were dried and bundled, and eventually found their way into mattress ticks. Straw provided reasonable insulation and a modest degree of cushioning, but it also crackled with every movement, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence of a winter night. It compressed unevenly under weight, creating valleys and ridges that your body had to accommodate rather than the other way around. It attracted insects, became musty with moisture from bodies and breath, and needed to be replaced entirely at least once a year. Corn husks served a similar purpose in areas where corn was the primary crop. Dried and shredded, they filled a tick with a crackling, rustling material that many settlers actually preferred to straw. Corn husks were thought to be cleaner, less attractive to vermin, and more resilient to compression over time. But they were also rougher, less forgiving against the body, and produced an even louder sound with every shift and turn through the night. The greatest luxury in mattress filling was cattail down. Those who lived near marshes or wetlands could harvest the fluffy seed heads of cattails, a material that approached the softness of actual down without requiring the slaughter of ducks or geese in quantities. Most frontier families could not afford. A cattail down mattress was warmer, softer, quieter than straw or husks, but it also clumped over time, shifted unpredictably, and required regular refluffing and eventual restuffing, just like other materials. It was better, but it was not a solution to the fundamental challenge of sleeping comfortably in an unforgiving environment. Some families supplemented their mattress filling with dried leaves, moss, pine needles, or whatever else could be gathered and dried. Each material had advantages and disadvantages. Pine needles smelled pleasant and were thought to repel insects, but compressed quickly and could poke through the tick's cloth. Dried ferns provided decent cushioning but deteriorated rapidly. The resourcefulness required to create any kind of comfortable sleeping surface from raw wilderness materials speaks to the fundamental adaptability of frontier families. Whatever the mattress contained, it was rarely enough on its own. You needed coverings, layers between your body and the cold air. And these layers tell their own story of frontier resourcefulness and economy. The ideal was a wool blanket, dense and warm, capable of retaining body heat even when the surrounding air dropped below freezing. Such blankets existed on the frontier, carried from eastern settlements at considerable expense, or traded with merchants who charged prices that reflected the difficulty of transportation. A good wool blanket was a treasure, carefully maintained, repaired when it wore thin, used until it literally fell apart, and even then cut up for patches or other purposes. Most families relied primarily on quilts. These were not the decorative quilts displayed in modern homes as folk art. These were working quilts, pieced together from worn-out clothing, stuffed with cotton batting in southern regions, or wool scraps in the north, stitched by hand in patterns that provided both structural integrity and whatever beauty could be managed amid the work. Every scrap in a quilt had a history. This piece from a dress your mother wore until it was too threadbare to mend again. That piece from a shirt your father worked in until the fabric gave way at the elbows and shoulders. Pieces from children's clothing outgrown and worn through, from curtains that finally tore, from anything made of usable fabric that had reached the end of its primary purpose. The quilt that covered you at night was a patchwork of your family's history, each piece a small memorial to garments that had served their time and now served again in this new form. Quilts were heavy, which was both advantage and disadvantage. The weight pressed down on your body, holding in warmth, but also limiting movement, creating a slight sense of constriction that some found comforting and others merely endured. Multiple quilts might be layered on the coldest nights, the combined weight significant enough that turning over required conscious effort. A small athletic event in the middle of the night. Beneath the quilts, you slept in your clothes. This was not a choice born of modesty or laziness, but of simple thermal necessity. The day clothes you wore provided an additional layer of insulation, and removing them would have meant exposing your body to air cold enough to make changing a form of torture. Your wool trousers or skirt, your linen shirt or blouse, perhaps a vest or bodice, all remained on through the night. On the coldest nights, you added more. Your coat, a hat pulled down over your ears, extra stockings, whatever could be layered without making movement impossible. But the most important source of warmth was not any material covering. It was other bodies. Human beings generate significant heat, and that heat, properly contained, could make the difference between tolerable rest and freezing misery. This is why frontier families slept together in ways that modern people, accustomed to private bedrooms and individual mattresses, might find difficult to imagine. The family bed was literal. Parents and children all shared the same sleeping surface, arranged in configurations designed to maximize warmth distribution and minimize vulnerability. The youngest children, most susceptible to cold, slept in the warmest positions. An infant stayed between mother and father, surrounded by adult body heat and close to the mother for nighttime nursing. Older children flanked the parents on either side, the family forming a continuous unit of shared warmth. No one slept stretched out. The luxury of sprawling across a mattress was unknown. Everyone curled inward, making themselves small, reducing the surface area exposed to cold air. Knees pulled up, arms tucked close, bodies curved toward the center of the bed where warmth accumulated. This fetal position was not a sign of distress, but a practical adaptation, a technique for heat conservation that bodies learned and maintained through the night. The dog, if the family had one, might sleep at the foot of the bed, adding its body heat to the collective warmth. Some families brought other animals into the cabin during the coldest weather. Piglets, in particular, were sometimes kept inside, their small bodies generating surprising warmth, their presence a calculation of survival rather than sentiment. The mingling of human and animal heat against the winter cold was simply practical, simply what needed to be done. Personal space did not exist in this arrangement. Every sound your body made, every shift and turn, every snore and murmur was noticed by everyone else. Children learned to sleep through their parents' movements. Parents learned to sleep through their children's. The family became a single sleeping organism, each member's rest dependent on and intertwined with everyone else's. There was loss in this arrangement. The privacy that modern couples take for granted, the intimacy possible only when alone, had to be managed in other ways, in other moments stolen from the endless work of the day. Parents exchanged glances that acknowledged what had been sacrificed for survival. But there was also something gained, a closeness, a physical bonding, a nightly reinforcement of family unity that had its own value, even as it imposed its own constraints. The children who grew up sleeping this way knew nothing else. This was simply how sleep worked. The press of siblings, the warmth of parents nearby, the weight of quilts, and the crackle of straw. These were the textures of rest. They would carry memories of this arrangement their whole lives, the sensations returning sometimes in dreams. In moments of half-sleep, when the past felt suddenly present, you settle now into your place on the tick, finding the position that disturbs others least. That maximizes your contact with the warmth on either side. The straw crackles beneath you, then quiets. Your children's breathing steadies into the rhythm of sleep. Your body's heat begins to accumulate beneath the quilts, creating a small pocket of warmth that you know from experience will not extend far beyond your immediate form. The cold waits just inches away, patient and persistent, held back by nothing more than fabric and flesh, and the stubborn refusal of living bodies to surrender their heat without a fight. This is the frontier bed. This is where settlers lay through winter nights, neither comfortable nor unbearable, simply adequate for survival, simply enough to permit the rest that would allow them to rise and face another day of work when morning came. They did not romanticize their sleeping conditions. They did not complain much, either. This was simply life, simply the way things were. And they adapted, because adaptation was the only option available. The hearth fire warmth, labor, and the mathematics of survival. The fire in your hearth is not mere comfort. It is life itself, measured in logs, rationed through darkness, never taken for granted. To understand how settlers slept through winter nights, you must understand their relationship with fire, a relationship more intimate and demanding than anything modern people experience with their thermostats and furnaces. The fireplace dominates one wall of your cabin. It is the largest feature of the structure, the most carefully built, the most critical to survival. The stones or bricks that frame it were selected and placed with attention that no other part of the cabin received. The chimney that rises from it represents engineering knowledge passed down through generations, adjusted for local materials and conditions, tested against the constant threat of fire spreading beyond its intended bounds. During the day, the fire roars. You feed it steadily, maintaining flames large enough to cook meals, to heat water, to warm the cabin against the cold that presses constantly at every gap and crack. The fire provides light as well as heat, pushing back the gloom on short winter days when darkness arrives in late afternoon and lingers until well past what your body insists should be morning. You live by the fire, orient your activities around it, feel its warmth on your face as you work, and its absence like a void when you move away. But at night, the fire must be managed differently. This is where the mathematics of survival become most stark, where choices must be made between competing goods, where the consequences of decisions play out in cold flesh and aching joints. Consider the labor that fire represents. Every log burning in your hearth was once a standing tree that someone felled with hand tools. An axe swung hundreds of times, cutting deeper with each stroke until the tree groaned and swayed and finally crashed to earth. This might take 30 minutes for a small tree, hours for a large one. Your arms ached, your hands blistered even through gloves. Your back protested the endless repetitive motion. Then the tree had to be limbed, the branches removed so the trunk could be managed, then cut into sections of appropriate length for the fireplace. A process requiring either a saw or more axe work, each cut demanding time and energy. Then split, if the sections were too large to burn efficiently, the satisfying crack of wood parting along its grain, providing brief moments of accomplishment amid the endless toil, then hauled. The woodpile cannot be too close to the cabin because sparks from the chimney could ignite it. So every log must be carried some distance, loaded into arms that are already tired, transported over ground that might be muddy or frozen or covered in snow. The woodpile grows slowly, log by log, hour by hour, day by day. It represents not just fuel, but time, not just warmth, but work. And watching it diminish through winter is watching your labor disappear into smoke and ash. A single night of heating requires a significant quantity of wood. The exact amount depends on the size of your cabin, the efficiency of your fireplace, the severity of the cold, and how warm you are trying to keep the space. But even a modest estimation suggests that maintaining a roaring fire through a winter night would consume what took hours to prepare. This is the equation that governs frontier fire management. This is why you cannot simply keep the cabin warm and comfortable through the night, so you bank the fire. This is a skill, an art really, learned through experience and refined through countless winter nights. The goal is to maintain enough heat to prevent the cabin from reaching dangerous cold while consuming as little fuel as possible. It is a balance, always a balance. And getting it wrong in either direction has consequences. The process begins after the evening meal, after whatever activities filled the hours between sunset and bedtime. You let the fire burn down somewhat, no longer adding fresh logs, allowing the flames to diminish into a bed of glowing coals. This bed of coals is your treasure, your reserve of heat, and you must protect it through the night. Carefully, you take a poker or a shovel and pull ashes over the coals. Not enough to smother them, but enough to insulate them, to slow their consumption, to let them burn gradually through the hours rather than flaring and dying quickly. The balance is delicate. Too many ashes and the fire dies completely, leaving you to face the challenge of rekindling from cold embers in a frozen cabin. Too few and the coals burn too hot, consuming themselves before dawn, wasting fuel and still leaving you cold in the morning. Experience teaches you how to read the coals, how to judge the right amount of ash for different conditions. On milder nights, you bank more heavily, confident that a smaller fire will suffice. On the coldest nights, you leave more coals exposed, accepting that you will burn more fuel in exchange for a slightly warmer cabin and a better chance of fire surviving until morning. Weather, wind, direction, how well the chinking is holding, how many bodies will be sharing the cabin's warmth. All these factors influence your calculations, usually made without conscious thought after enough practice. With the fire banked, the cabin begins its long, slow cooling. The process is gradual at first, almost imperceptible. The air that was warm enough during the evening drops, degree by degree. The walls, which absorbed some heat during the day, begin to radiate it away to the colder air outside. The floor, never truly warm, grows colder still as the earth's chill asserts itself in the absence of direct flame. By midnight, the temperature inside the cabin has dropped significantly. The fire's glow has diminished to a faint orange flicker barely visible from the bed. The cold has found new gaps in the chinking, or perhaps the same gaps feel more significant now that the fire no longer pushes back so strongly. Frost might begin to form on surfaces near the walls, on any metal objects, on the water in the bucket near the door. By the hours before dawn, the cabin reaches its coldest point. The fire has burned down to its minimum. Just enough coals remaining to promise rekindling, but not enough to provide meaningful warmth. This is when you wake, or your wife wakes, whoever surfaces first from shallow sleep and recognizes that the fire needs attention. This is when the real courage of frontier life reveals itself. In the simple act of leaving a warm bed to tend flames in a freezing cabin, you push back the quilts. The cold hits your face first, sharp and immediate, making you gasp before you can control the reaction. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, and your feet touch the floor. Even through stockings, the cold of packed earth shocks your system. Everything in your body wants to retreat, to pull the quilts back up, to stay in the relative warmth you have created through the night. But the fire must be tended. This is not optional. This is survival. You move quickly to the hearth. Your eyes have adjusted to the darkness enough to find your way without stumbling. You take the poker and stir the coals, checking how much remains, assessing what you have to work with. If you banked the fire well, there should be a core of glowing embers beneath the ash, still hot enough to ignite kindling without the tedious work of starting a fire from scratch. You add small pieces of wood first, shavings or thin splits that will catch quickly. You blow gently on the coals, providing oxygen to help the flames take hold. There is a moment of uncertainty, a pause when it is not clear whether the fire will catch or whether you will need to resort to more desperate measures. Then a flame appears, small and tentative, testing its strength against the cold air. You add slightly larger pieces, protecting the new fire without smothering it. The flame grows. Heat begins to radiate outward. Within a few minutes, you have rebuilt the fire to a serviceable level. Not roaring, not wasteful, but enough to begin warming the cabin again. Enough to promise that by the time the family rises, the worst of the night's cold will have been pushed back. You stand for a moment by the hearth, letting the heat soak into your front while your back remains cold. The uneven warmth that is the constant companion of fireplace living. Then you return to bed. The warmth you left behind has mostly dissipated, and you must rebuild it through body heat alone. You slip back under the quilts carefully, trying not to disturb the others, finding your position in the family arrangement. The bed feels cold after those minutes by the fire, but gradually, warmth returns. Your spouse might murmur something, half awake, acknowledging your effort without fully waking. The children have not stirred, their sleep deeper than yours, protected by your vigilance. The fire will hold now until morning. The cabin will warm slowly as dawn approaches. Another small victory against the cold. Another night navigated through careful management and willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of those you love. This is the rhythm of frontier winter nights, repeated countless times in countless cabins across the wilderness. A ritual of survival so fundamental that it required no discussion, no special recognition, no celebration. It was simply what needed to be done, and someone did it. Night after night after night, if you are still listening, still drifting in that space between waking and sleep. I wonder what aspects of this life surprise you most. What seems hardest to imagine enduring? What seems strangest from the vantage of our modern comfort? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments when you wake up, to tell me which parts of frontier survival make you most grateful for the world we live in now, or most admiring of those who endured what we would find unendured. The wilderness night sounds silence, and sleeping lightly the wilderness beyond your walls is never truly silent. And you have learned that silence itself can be the most alarming sound of all. To sleep on the frontier was to sleep lightly, always half listening, always prepared to surface from dreams at any irregularity in the soundscape that surrounded your small wooden shelter. Let yourself drift into that soundscape now, into the symphony of a frontier night that was the constant backdrop to settler sleep. Begin with the wind, that oldest of companions, moving through the forest around your clearing with its 1,000 voices. When it passes through bare branches, it makes a sound like whispered conversation, like distant crowds speaking in a language just beyond understanding. When it moves through pines, the sound deepens, becomes almost like water flowing, a continuous murmur that can soothe or unsettle depending on your state of mind. The wind does not blow steadily. It gusts and fades, rises and falls, creating a rhythm that your sleeping mind tracks without conscious awareness. A sudden increase in wind strength might pull you toward waking, some ancient part of your brain checking whether the change represents danger. A sustained calm might let you sink deeper into rest. The wind is information, constantly updating you on conditions outside your walls. And your body processes this information even as you sleep. The trees respond to the wind with their own voices. Pine boughs creak and sway, producing rhythmic groaning sounds that become almost musical if you can listen without fear. Hardwood branches rattle against each other like bones, a more percussive sound that punctuates the wind's flow. Sometimes a branch breaks under the weight of snow or ice, the crack carrying clearly through cold air, sharp and sudden enough to jolt you toward waking before your mind identifies the sound as harmless. The forest is full of animals, and animals are active at night. Owls call across the darkness, their voices carrying for miles in the still cold air. You have learned to identify different owls by their calls. The great horned owl, with its deep, resonant hooting, a sound that seems to come from the earth itself. The barn owl's eerie shriek, almost human in its anguish, terrifying the first time you heard it, but now simply noted and filed away. The smaller owls, with their various whistles and trills, each species announcing its presence to potential mates and warning competitors away from territory farther off. You might hear wolves. Their howls rise and fall in patterns that seem to carry meaning you cannot decode. Conversations between pack members spread across miles of frozen landscape. The sound makes your children stir even in their sleep, makes them press closer to your warmth. Some deep ancestral memory recognizes wolves as threat, triggers responses that no conscious reassurance can fully suppress. You know the wolves rarely approach cabins. You know they fear fire and avoid humans when they can. But knowledge and instinct are different things. And instinct keeps you alert whenever that long, wavering howl drifts through the darkness. Closer to the cabin, smaller animals move through the night. You might hear deer stepping through the snow near your woodpile, their hooves crunching through frozen crust. You might hear foxes passing on their hunting rounds, their sharp barks sometimes startling enough to wake you fully before you recognize the source. Raccoons investigating anything that might contain food, opossums shuffling through their slow nocturnal routines. The forest is busy at night, full of lives being lived according to patterns that predate human presence by countless generations. Inside the cabin, sounds are smaller but no less present. Mice move in the walls, their tiny feet creating scratching and skittering sounds that you have learned to ignore. There is nothing to be done about them tonight. They have found ways into your winter stores despite your efforts, and you will discover their damage in the morning. For now, you simply note their presence and let your mind release the concern. Some battles must be fought in daylight. The cabin itself speaks throughout the night. As the temperature drops, wood contracts. This produces sounds ranging from gentle creaks to sharp cracks that can sound alarmingly like breaking or gunshots. The first winter in a new cabin, these sounds kept many settlers bolt upright in bed, hearts pounding, certain that the structure was failing around them. By the second winter, you know your cabin's voice. You can distinguish between the normal complaints of cooling wood and anything that might indicate actual structural concern. That sharp crack from the northeast corner. That's the log that always speaks when the temperature drops below a certain point. The long groan from the roof. That's the weight of accumulated snow shifting, settling into new patterns. Nothing to worry about. The fire adds its own contributions to the soundscape. Even banked low, it whispers and sighs. The occasional soft pop of an ember or the gentle collapse of ash. These sounds are comforting, signs that the fire still lives, that warmth remains available when morning comes. A complete absence of fire sounds would be alarming, would pull you from sleep to check whether the coals had died and left you facing a cold rekindling, the chinking in your walls. Imperfect, as it always is, creates passages for sound as well as air. The wind finds these gaps and makes them sing, each crack and hole producing its own particular note as air moves through. Some of these sounds are merely whistles, high and thin. Others are deeper, almost like breath, as if the cabin itself were a living thing slowly inhaling and exhaling through the night. You know which sounds are normal, which indicate new gaps that need attention when weather permits. Beyond all these identifiable sounds lies the deeper quality of wilderness silence, not true silence, because true silence almost never exists. but a particular quality of quiet that modern people rarely experience. No traffic, no electrical hum, no distant sirens or aircraft. None of the background noise that fills even the quietest modern nights. This frontier quiet has weight, has presence, presses against your eardrums with an almost physical sensation. Within this quiet, any unusual sound stands out starkly. A footstep where no footstep should be. A voice when you know no neighbors are near. The specific quality of human movement, which differs subtly from animal movement in ways your sleeping brain can detect. These are the sounds you listen for, even in sleep. The sounds that could mean danger, requiring immediate response. The rifle stays near the bed, not from paranoia, but from practicality. You have heard stories, some true, some exaggerated, of families attacked in the night by hostile indigenous people in regions where conflict has flared, by outlaws and thieves who prey on isolated homesteads, by wild animals grown desperate with hunger in the depths of winter. The likelihood of any specific night bringing such danger is small, but the consequences of being unprepared are catastrophic. So the rifle stays within reach, powder and shot arranged where you can find them in darkness. And your sleeping mind keeps one ear tuned for sounds that would require you to use them. This vigilance has a cost. You never sleep as deeply as you might in safer circumstances. Some part of your awareness remains on duty throughout the night, monitoring, evaluating, ready to wake the rest of you if necessary. This is exhausting over time, a slow accumulation of incomplete rest that wears on body and mind. But it is necessary. On the frontier, deep, unguarded sleep is a luxury that could become a fatal mistake. Your children sleep more deeply than you do. This is right. This is as it should be. Their young bodies requiring uninterrupted rest for growth and health. Your vigilance protects their ability to sleep without fear. Your wakefulness, a gift you give them even as it costs you your own complete rest. They will learn to sleep lightly as they grow older, as they take on adult responsibilities, as they start their own families and understand for the first time the weight their parents carried through every night of their childhood. Your spouse shares this burden. You have not discussed it, perhaps have never explicitly acknowledged it, but you both know. When one of you surfaces toward waking, the other can sink deeper into sleep, trusting that someone is listening. You trade off through the night without coordination, an unconscious choreography developed through years of sleeping side by side in dangerous circumstances. When you tend the fire in the dark hours, your spouse murmurs acknowledgement and falls back into deeper rest, knowing you are awake, knowing the cabin is watched. There is strange comfort in this vigilance, once you accept it as permanent. You are not helpless in your sleep, not entirely vulnerable, despite the closed eyes and stilled body. You are watching even when you are not watching, alert even in rest. The wilderness might be vast and indifferent, but you are not defenseless against it. Your awareness is a wall, as real as the logs surrounding you, perhaps more reliable, since it does not develop gaps that need constant chinking. The night passes through its phases. The early hours after settling into bed, when sleep comes most easily, the body still carrying warmth from evening activities, the fire still glowing with some strength. The middle hours, deepest and coldest, when the temperature drops and the fire burns low and the darkness feels most complete. The pre-dawn hours, when someone rises to tend the fire and the first gray light begins to promise relief. Through all these phases, the soundscape continues, the wilderness speaking its constant languages, and you listen even as you sleep. This is how settlers rested. Not in the complete surrender of modern sleep, not in the protected cocoon of locked doors and alarm systems and emergency services waiting to be called. They rested as humans rested for most of history, lightly, alertly, ready to respond to whatever the night might bring. Their sleep was partial because their safety was partial. Their rest interrupted because danger was always possible. Their nights woven through with awareness because awareness might mean survival. And yet they slept. Despite everything, they found rest enough to rise each morning and face another day of labor. The human body adapts, finds ways to recover even under imperfect conditions. The human mind adjusts its expectations, finds sufficiency where it once found lack. They slept because they had to, because the alternative was collapse, because tomorrow required whatever strength sleep could provide: prayers, rituals, and making peace with darkness, in the complete darkness of a frontier cabin. With the fire burned low and the wilderness pressing close, the boundary between the physical world and something older grew thin and permeable. Settlers did not simply lie down and close their eyes. They prepared for sleep through rituals and practices that acknowledged the vulnerability of unconsciousness, the strangeness of dreams, and the persistent human need to feel protected against forces beyond our control. The gathering for bedtime prayer was nearly universal among frontier families, cutting across different Christian denominations, from strict Calvinist to relaxed frontier Methodist. As the day's work concluded and the fire was banked for the night, the family assembled. Father, mother, children arranged by age, perhaps a hired hand or visiting relative if such were present. This was not optional, not a suggestion that children could decline if they felt tired or resistant. This was mandatory, as essential to the household routine as eating meals or tending livestock. The father typically led. If a father was present, he might read from the Bible, choosing passages appropriate to the season or to whatever concerns weighed on the family. Psalms were popular, their poetry offering comfort and their themes of divine protection resonating deeply with people who lived surrounded by genuine danger. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul. These words, repeated night after night, year after year, created a rhythm of reassurance that became inseparable from the transition to sleep. After Scripture came prayer. This might be formal, following patterns learned in childhood and passed through generations, or it might be spontaneous, speaking directly to God about the specific concerns of this family on this night in this place. Thanks for the day's blessings, however modest. Petitions for protection through the hours of darkness. Requests for health, for adequate food, for safety from the wilderness that pressed so close. The prayer acknowledged vulnerability, while asserting faith that divine protection was available for those who asked properly. Children learned specific bedtime prayers, verses meant to be recited perfectly, word for word, without variation. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. This familiar prayer emerged from the genuine fear that one might not wake in the morning. The lines that follow often softened in modern versions, were stark in their original form. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. This was not morbid to frontier families. This was realistic. Death could come at any time, from disease, from accident, from violence, from 100 causes that modern medicine and safety systems have largely neutralized. The prayer prepared the soul for that possibility, ensuring that if this night proved to be one's last, the proper words had been spoken. The proper orientation toward God had been established. The exactness of recitation mattered. Children were expected to repeat the prayer precisely, without rushing, without mumbling, without the kind of casual delivery that might suggest mere habit rather than genuine devotion. Any mistake required starting over. An imperfect prayer might not provide complete protection, might leave gaps through which spiritual or physical harm could enter. This discipline of exactness was not arbitrary cruelty, but genuine concern for children's safety, expressed through the framework of belief that governed frontier spiritual life after formal prayers. The family dispersed to their sleeping arrangements, but the protective practices continued, often in smaller, more personal ways that might never be spoken of directly, but were passed from parent to child through observation and quiet instruction. The Bible itself served as a protective object, not merely a source of words, but a physical talisman against the forces of darkness. Many families kept a Bible near the bed, on a small shelf within reach, or tucked under a pillow where its presence could be felt through the night. The placement mattered. The Bible should not touch the floor, as this showed disrespect and weakened its protective power. It should be positioned where the sleeper might reach it quickly if needed. Though what exactly one would do with it in an emergency was never specified. The presence was what mattered, the physical reminder of divine protection, resting close to vulnerable sleeping bodies. Other objects accumulated in and around frontier beds, each placed with intention, even if that intention was never articulated in formal terms. Small, meaningful items might be tucked into the straw tick or sewn into the mattress cover. A button from a father's wedding clothes, carrying blessings of masculine strength and protection to children who slept above it. A lock of hair from a deceased loved one, maintaining connection across the boundary of death. A smooth stone carried from the old country, linking this new and dangerous place to the remembered safety of ancestral lands. These objects were not discussed openly. To speak of them might diminish their power, might expose their owners to ridicule from those who claimed more rational beliefs. But they persisted, hidden and silent, doing their work of reassurance through the long nights. Quilts carried protective symbolism woven directly into their patterns. Certain geometric designs were believed to ward off evil, their mathematical precision creating barriers that chaos could not penetrate. The log cabin pattern, with its interlocking squares, was thought to create a maze that confused malevolent spirits trying to reach the sleeper. The bear's paw pattern invoked the protective strength of that powerful animal. Star patterns called down celestial protection, connecting the small human bed to the vast order of the heavens. Women who stitched these quilts understood the symbolism they were encoding, choosing patterns that would serve both aesthetic and spiritual purposes. Colors in quilts also carried meaning. Red thread was protective, its association with blood and life force, creating barriers against death and harm. Blue promoted peaceful sleep, its connection to sky and heaven inviting calm and divine presence. A woman's night vigilance, labor, and quiet endurance. If you are a woman in this cabin, your night carries burdens your husband may never fully understand. Your sleep is never truly your own. It belongs to the children who need you, to the fire that must be watched, to the thousand small responsibilities that do not pause simply because darkness has fallen. The frontier asked hard things of everyone who ventured into it, but it asked particular things of women. And those particular things shaped how women slept or failed to sleep. Through the long winter nights, begin with the baby. If you have a nursing infant, and most frontier women spent years with a nursing infant at their breast, your nights are organized around feeding. The baby sleeps between you and your husband, the warmest and safest position in the family bed, close enough that you can feel every breath, every shift, every small sound that indicates waking or discomfort. When the baby stirs, you wake. This is not a choice. This is biology, maternal attunement that has been shaped by countless generations of mothers whose babies' survival depended on quick response. Nursing in the darkness of a frontier cabin requires careful maneuvering. The air is cold, often bitterly cold, and any skin you expose loses heat rapidly. But the baby must be positioned correctly, must have access to the breast, must be supported while feeding. You learn to manage this with minimal exposure, keeping quilts arranged to cover as much of both your bodies as possible, creating small tunnels of warmth within the larger cold of the cabin. Your husband sleeps on. The other children sleep on. This is your work, performed in darkness, acknowledged by no one, essential to survival. Sometimes nursing does not go smoothly. The baby struggles to latch in the cold and darkness. Your milk does not flow easily after the day's exhaustion. The baby cries, the sound piercing in the silent cabin, and you must soothe and try again, perhaps sitting up, perhaps walking the small space available, perhaps simply holding and rocking until whatever discomfort passes. These interruptions fragment your rest into periods too short for real restoration, night after night, until exhaustion becomes a permanent state rather than a temporary condition. Beyond the baby, the other children need watching. A restless sleeper might roll toward the edge of the bed, might kick off covers and grow dangerously cold, might experience a nightmare that requires comfort. You monitor their breathing without conscious effort, registering each small change in rhythm, each cough or murmur that might indicate illness developing. When a child wakes frightened, it is usually you who responds. You who whispers reassurance into the darkness. You who finds words to make the scary sounds outside become bearable. If your husband is absent, and frontier husbands were often absent for days or weeks on hunting trips, trading journeys, or militia obligations, all the nighttime responsibilities fall to you alone. The fire must be tended. Strange sounds must be investigated. The rifle must be ready, and you must be prepared to use it, though you hope you never have to, though the thought of violence against another person or against a desperate animal fills you with dread that you cannot express to anyone. Many frontier women spent significant portions of their lives managing households alone, while husbands pursued activities that took them away from home. The mythology of frontier life often focuses on these masculine adventures, the hunting and exploring and fighting that fill history books and folk legends. But for every man pursuing adventure, there was usually a woman maintaining the homestead, keeping children alive, enduring isolation that would break many modern people, sleeping lightly through nights filled with responsibility and fear. The physical exhaustion that accumulates through frontier womanhood is difficult to convey. Pregnancies, often many of them, are taxing even under ideal conditions. On the frontier, with limited nutrition, constant hard labor, and minimal medical support, pregnancy was simply endured while normal work continued. You gathered water while pregnant, washed clothes and cooked meals, and cared for existing children while your body devoted its resources to growing another life. Then came birth, usually attended only by whatever neighbor women could be reached in time, sometimes attended by no one but your husband, sometimes managed entirely alone when circumstances prevented any assistance at all. You might have delivered babies in the same bed where you sleep each night, the straw tick absorbing blood and fluid, cleaned as well as possible afterward, but never entirely return to its previous state. The boundaries between different aspects of life were thin on the frontier. Birth and death and sleep and work all happened in the same small space, witnessed by the same family members, marked by whatever rituals could be managed with limited resources. Some of your children died. This is almost certainly true if you are a frontier woman who bore more than a few children. Infant mortality was brutal, claiming babies to fevers and infections and conditions that would be easily treated today. Childhood diseases swept through settlements, taking some children and sparing others according to patterns that seemed random and cruel. Accidents happened, drownings and falls and burns, the frontier providing endless ways for small bodies to come to harm. You buried these children. You marked their graves as best you could, knowing that you might move on someday and leave those small mounds behind. You went to bed at night in a room that once held a child's breathing and now holds only memory. The grief lives in you, never fully processed because there is never time to simply grieve. Always more work to do, always more children who need you, always another day that must be survived before you can afford the luxury of mourning. This grief visits most often at night, when the work stops, when the distractions fall away, when you lie in darkness, listening to the breathing of the children who survived. You sometimes think of those who did not. Where are they now? Do they know you still love them? Was there something you could have done differently? Some sign you missed? Some care you failed to provide? These questions have no answers, but they circle nonetheless, keeping you from sleep, filling the dark hours with sorrow that has nowhere else to go. If you are fortunate, if other families have settled near enough to create something like a community, you have women to share some of these burdens with, not the nighttime responsibilities themselves, which each woman must carry for her own household, but the knowledge and emotional support that make those responsibilities more bearable. You talk with neighbor women about children's health, about techniques for soothing colicky babies, about herbs that might help with sleep or pain. You share birth stories, comparing experiences, laughing sometimes at the absurdity of what your bodies have done, crying sometimes over losses that only other mothers can truly understand. These connections sustain you, They remind you that you are not alone, even when you feel completely alone. That other women are lying awake in other cabins this same night, watching their fires, nursing their babies, wondering if they are doing enough, if they are strong enough, if they can survive another winter of cold and isolation and relentless responsibility. But the neighbor women are not here now. Tonight, like most nights, you are alone with your sleeping family, alone with your thoughts, alone with whatever rest you can steal from the hours before dawn brings new work. You feel the baby's warm weight against your body. Hear the older children's steady breathing. Sense your husband's presence on the other side of the small, hot center where the baby sleeps. This is your family. This is what you are protecting. This is why you lie awake when your body begs for sleep, why you listen for danger, why you would fight with whatever strength you could summon if threat appeared at your door. Frontier. Women did not often record their nighttime experiences. They were too busy surviving to document their struggles, too focused on the immediate to reflect on the chronic. What we know of their nights comes mostly from inference, from fragments in letters and diaries that mentioned sleep in passing, from the logical implications of their daily circumstances. But we can be certain that their nights were hard. We can be certain that they carried burdens that history has largely failed to acknowledge. We can be certain that without their vigilance, their endurance, their willingness to sacrifice their own rest for the sake of those they loved, far fewer frontier families would have survived. I invite you now to think about the women in your own family's past, the mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers who lived before the comforts we take for granted existed. They lay awake in their own dark rooms, in their own cold winters, carrying their own burdens of responsibility and fear. They are your connection to this frontier woman we have imagined together. Links in a chain of maternal endurance that stretches back through generations. Whatever rest they found, whatever moments of peace they experienced in their difficult lives, they passed something forward, something that eventually became you. Listening to these words in the warmth and safety they could scarcely have imagined. Community in the wilderness, neighbors, assistants, and shared survival. You are alone in your cabin tonight, but you are not alone on this frontier. Your survival is woven together with others who understand your struggle because they share it. The isolation of frontier life was real and often overwhelming. But within that isolation, communities formed, networks of mutual aid that made survival possible for families who could not have managed entirely on their own. Consider how your cabin came to exist. You did not build it alone. When you first arrived in this place, when you stood in the clearing that would become your homestead and faced the enormous task of creating shelter before winter, you were not expected to accomplish this alone. Word went out through whatever channels connected this scattered frontier community. A new family was raising a cabin. Help was needed, and help came. Men arrived from homesteads miles away, traveling through forest and across streams to reach your clearing. They brought their axes, their skills, their strong backs developed through their own years of frontier labor. Some you had met before, encountered on the trails or at trading posts. Others were strangers whose names you would learn as you worked alongside them. All understood the compact that governed frontier community. Today they helped you. Tomorrow, next month, next year, You would help them or help someone else who needed what you could provide. The cabin raising itself had an almost festive quality. Despite the hard labor involved, women came too, bringing food, helping prepare meals for the workers, tending children so that mothers could contribute to the collective effort. There was conversation, exchange of news, the simple pleasure of human company after weeks or months of isolation. The cabin rose log by log, the walls taking shape through combined effort, the work proceeding faster than any single family could have managed. By evening, you had walls, perhaps not complete, perhaps needing more work, but the structure was established, the most labor-intensive phase accomplished through shared effort. The neighbors dispersed to their own homesteads, their own responsibilities, but something remained beyond the physical structure they had helped create. A relationship had been formed. An obligation had been incurred, not resented. You were now part of a network of mutual aid that would shape your life for as long as you remained in this place. This network provided more than labor for major projects. It provided knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of those who had lived in this particular environment longer than you, who had learned its rhythms and dangers and opportunities through experience you had yet to gain. Neighbors told you which areas to avoid in spring when floods could trap the unwary. They told you which plants were useful for medicine, which were dangerous, which made the best mattress stuffing. They told you about the indigenous peoples whose territory overlapped with the settlement, which families were friendly, which groups had reasons for hostility, how to conduct yourself to minimize danger. Knowledge about sleeping more comfortably passed through these networks. Like other essential information, a neighbor woman might mention that she had better luck with corn husks than straw for mattress filling, that her children slept more peacefully when she added certain dried herbs to the bedding, that her husband's snoring improved when she raised the head of their bed slightly. These small pieces of advice, accumulated and shared over years, made the difference between merely surviving and surviving with some degree of comfort. Medical knowledge traveled through frontier networks with particular urgency. When children developed coughs that would not clear, when fevers rose and would not break, when mysterious ailments defied home remedies, families turned to neighbors with more experience. Sometimes this meant seeking out a particular woman known for her healing knowledge, someone who had studied herbs and symptoms more carefully than others, who had attended more births and deaths and developed intuitions that others lacked. These informal healers held crucial roles in frontier communities, their nighttime visits to sick households sometimes making the difference between recovery and decline. Religious community, where it existed, provided another form of connection. Circuit-riding preachers traveled regular routes through frontier settlements, bringing worship services to communities too small and scattered to support permanent churches. These visits were social events as much as religious ones, opportunities for families to gather, to see faces they might not see for months otherwise, to feel part of something larger than their individual struggles. The sermons preached at these gatherings often addressed themes relevant to frontier experience: the protective power of faith, the importance of endurance through hardship, the rewards waiting in the next life for those who maintained righteousness despite the difficulties of this one. Families carried these messages back to their isolated cabins. The the words returning to mind during difficult nights, providing comfort when human company was impossible. Trade networks connected frontier communities to wider economic systems, bringing goods that could not be produced locally, taking away products of frontier labor in exchange. The trading post, if one existed within reasonable distance, was more than a commercial establishment. It was an information hub where news arrived from the outside world, where letters might be collected or sent, where encounters with strangers provided glimpses of lives very different from the frontier norm. Visits to trading posts broke the monotony of isolated existence, provided topics for conversation through the long winter evenings, reminded families that the world extended far beyond the forests that surrounded their cabins. But community also brought complications. Where humans gather, conflicts arise. Disputes over property boundaries, over water rights, over livestock that strayed onto neighboring land. Personal animosities that developed from slights, real or imagined, from competition for limited resources, from the close quarters of frontier social life where everyone knew everyone else's business. Some frontier communities were riven by feuds that lasted generations, the original causes forgotten while the hostility persisted. These tensions could make nights difficult in their own way, lying awake, wondering whether a neighbor harbored resentment, whether a dispute over a fence line might escalate into something more serious, whether the community that provided support might also become a source of threat. The rifle near the bed protected against wild animals and hostile strangers, but it also represented awareness that conflict with neighbors was always possible, that frontier justice was rough and personal, that disagreements could turn violent far from any law enforcement. Still, the benefits of community outweighed its complications for most frontier families. The alternative, true isolation, without any network of mutual aid, was simply too dangerous. A family that cut itself off from neighbors faced the full weight of frontier challenges alone. Without help when disaster struck, without information that might prevent disaster, without the simple human contact that preserved mental health through the long winters. As you lie in your cabin tonight, you can think of the others who lie in their cabins across this frontier landscape. The family a mile to the north, with their 3 children and their struggling milk cow. The widow 2 miles east, managing alone since her husband died last winter. Her determination an inspiration to everyone who knows her story. The large family to the south, with so many children you lose track of their names, their cabin always loud with activity when you visit. These are your people, your community, your network of survival. You might not see them for weeks at a time. The winter makes travel difficult, and everyone has too much work to allow for casual visiting, but you know they are there. You know that if disaster struck your homestead, they would come. You know that when spring allows easier movement, you will see their faces again. Exchange news about who survived the winter and how. Rebuild the connections that isolation has stretched but not broken. This knowledge provides a kind of warmth that no fire can match. The warmth of belonging to something larger than yourself, of being part of a human community, however scattered and struggling. You are not alone. You have never been entirely alone. And when morning comes and work begins again, you will carry this knowledge with you through the day as you have carried it through the night. Warmth as privilege, how the wealthy slept differently. Not all who slept on the frontier shared the same night. Some lay in comfort, while others shivered, and the distance between them was measured in more than miles. We have spent much of our journey in the cabin of an ordinary settler family, experiencing the cold and the vigilance and the hard straw tick that was their lot. But the frontier also held those who slept quite differently, whose nights unfolded in warmth and relative luxury that would have seemed almost unimaginable to their struggling neighbors. Consider a garrison commander at one of the frontier forts scattered along the advancing edge of settlement. His quarters are not a rough log cabin, but a proper house, built of sawn lumber by soldiers whose labor was his to command. The walls are straight, the corners square, the construction reflecting standards impossible for families racing against winter with only their own hands. Glass windows admit light during the day and can be shuttered at night, a luxury beyond the means of most frontier families. Multiple rooms serve distinct purposes, a concept that log cabin families could only dream of. In the commander's bedroom, a proper wooden bed frame rises high off the floor, eliminating the ground's cold entirely. The mattress is not straw or corn husks, but feathers, an enormous quantity of down from geese or ducks, carefully cleaned and dried and sewn into a tick that conforms to the body with luxurious softness. Feather mattresses were expensive to produce and transport, available only to those with significant resources. The sensation of sleeping on one, for anyone accustomed to straw, must have felt almost sinfully comfortable. Layers of proper bedding cover the feather mattress. Sheets of cotton or linen, changed and washed regularly by servants whose labor makes such cleanliness possible. Wool blankets, professionally woven, even and warm, without the patches and repairs that marked ordinary frontier bedding. Perhaps a proper quilt as well, but made from quality fabric rather than worn-out scraps, decorative as well as functional. The greatest luxury might be the warming pan. This simple device, a covered metal container with a long handle, was filled with hot coals from the fire and passed between the sheets just before bed. The heat it left behind transformed cold linens into a warm nest that retained temperature for hours. Servants performed this ritual, timing it so that when the commander and his wife retired, the bed welcomed them with warmth already established. No period of shivering while body heat slowly accumulated. The fire in this bedroom burned steadily through the night, tended by servants whose job was specifically to maintain warmth in the household. Unlike frontier families who had to calculate every log against future need, the garrison commander had wood supplied through military logistics, cut and hauled by soldiers whose labor was directed to this purpose. He did not lie awake calculating fuel supplies. He did not wake in the cold hours to tend flames himself. He simply slept, warm and protected, while others managed the systems that made his comfort possible. The psychological difference this made cannot be overstated. To know that warmth would continue uninterrupted, that someone else was responsible for maintaining it, that the morning would bring not a cold cabin requiring immediate attention but a room already made comfortable for waking. This removed layers of anxiety that ordinary settlers never escaped. That shaped their sleep into something lighter and more vigilant than the commander ever experienced. Successful merchants achieved similar comfort through different means. a man who established a trading post in frontier territory, who bought low from desperate sellers and sold high to those without alternatives, could accumulate wealth sufficient for real comfort even in the wilderness. His house might not be as fine as the commander's, but it could approach those standards, could include the feather mattress and the proper bedding, could employ servants or slaves to manage nighttime maintenance. The merchant's nights might be troubled in different ways. The calculations that occupied his mind were not about fuel and survival, but about prices and debts and the management of a business dependent on the struggles of others. He knew that his comfort came from others' need, that the family buying seed on credit at punishing interest rates was making his soft bed possible. Some merchants carried this knowledge easily, viewing wealth disparity as natural order, as simple market function without moral dimension. Others found their sleep troubled by awareness of how their prosperity was constructed, by questions about justice that had no comfortable answers. Landed gentry, who established themselves in frontier territories, brought old-world expectations of appropriate living standards. They might struggle initially, as all new settlers did, but their starting resources allowed faster progression toward comfort. They could hire labor rather than doing everything themselves. They could import goods rather than making do with local materials. Within a few years of arrival, they might have achieved conditions that ordinary settlers would never reach in a lifetime. These elite households maintained bedtime rituals imported from more refined settings. The formal good night, the proper night clothes, the elaborate preparations for sleep that marked civilized life. Servants were dismissed with specific instructions for morning, creating the fiction that the household would run itself through the night. The labor that made comfort possible was rendered invisible through careful social choreography, allowing the wealthy to experience their ease as natural rather than constructed. The difference in sleep quality between classes translated directly into difference in capacity and power. A well-rested commander made better decisions than exhausted soldiers. A well-rested merchant negotiated more effectively than desperate settlers trying to conduct business, while managing sleepless children at home. Sleep itself became a tool of advantage, its quality correlating directly with social position. Elite children grew up expecting comfort. They knew nothing else, had no framework for understanding what their less fortunate neighbors experienced. The warm beds, the adequate food, the protection from immediate physical hardship. These were simply how life worked as far as they could tell. They grew into adults with different expectations, different capacities for endurance, different relationships with discomfort than those raised in cold cabins with straw ticks and uncertain food supplies. The disparity was visible even in darkness. The elite household glowed with light, candles burning freely in multiple rooms, windows casting illumination outward into the night. A traveler could identify the wealthy homes simply by their brightness, could see from the outside which families commanded resources sufficient to push back darkness more effectively than others. The struggling cabin with its single dim fire barely registered against the night, almost invisible. Its inhabitants as obscured from notice as their concerns were from the attention of those who slept in comfort. Some elite individuals felt troubled by these disparities. Their letters and diaries reveal moral wrestling, uncertainty about whether the social order that benefited them was just They might perform charitable acts, offering cast-off clothing or small gifts of food to struggling neighbors. Gestures that were genuinely helpful, but that also reinforced the hierarchy they claimed to question. The fundamental structures that produced their comfort remained unexamined, continued to operate while conscience was soothed by occasional kindness. The wind moved between all these dwellings, finding gaps in poor cabins and few gaps in fine houses, carrying the same cold to all sleepers regardless of their status. This impartiality of natural forces perhaps provides some perspective on human hierarchies. The commander would eventually die, as all people die. The merchant's wealth would eventually disperse or be lost. The structures that seemed so solid would eventually collapse and return to earth. In these longer time frames, the differences between how people slept mattered less than the shared experience of sleeping at all, of being human, of needing rest and finding it imperfectly in a world that offered no perfect solutions. But in the immediate experience of a frontier winter night, the differences mattered enormously. They meant warmth or cold, rest or exhaustion, the accumulated advantages of good sleep or the accumulated deficits of poor sleep. They shaped bodies and minds, influenced outcomes, determined in some measure who would thrive and who would merely survive, and who would fail entirely. Warmth was the great divider. Not wealth in the abstract, but this specific expression of wealth. The simple luxury of sleeping without cold, the simple mercy of sleeping warm. Those who had it took it for granted. Those who lacked it never forgot its absence. Dawn's slow arrival light, renewal, and beginning again. The first gray light of morning does not arrive suddenly. It seeps into the world slowly, like mercy that knows better than to startle those who have endured. You have made it through another night. The darkness is loosening its grip, and somewhere in your exhausted body, relief begins to kindle alongside the fire you are about to rebuild. The coldest hour has passed. That stretch of time just before dawn, when the fire burns lowest and the winter night reaches its deepest chill. When the cabin's temperature drops to its minimum and the body most craves warmth, that hour is behind you now. You survived it, as you have survived all the others, through blankets and body heat and sheer endurance. The gray light appears first at the edges of things, around the shutters where tiny gaps admit the earliest evidence that the sun is returning, through the oiled paper of windows if your cabin has them, a gradual brightening that transforms black to charcoal to gray. The darkness does not flee, but rather dilutes, becomes less absolute, allows shapes to emerge from the uniform blackness that has filled the cabin since the fire burned low. You are awake now, fully awake, though you have been drifting in and out of shallow sleep for hours. The transition from night to day happens gradually in your mind as well as in the cabin around you. Thoughts that circled endlessly in the darkness begin to find their proper places, to arrange themselves into the day's priorities. Wood needs to be brought in. Water needs to be hauled. The animals need checking. Breakfast needs preparing. The list is long, is always long, but somehow feels more manageable in the growing light than it did in the small hours. You rise. The cold air hits your face, as it always does, but there is a difference now. Morning cold feels different from midnight cold, more temporary, more clearly leading somewhere. The fire that you will build will grow, will warm the cabin, will push back this chill as the sun outside pushes back the night. There is direction now, a sense that conditions will improve rather than worsen at the hearth. You find the coals you banked last night still glowing, red beneath their blanket of ash. This is the small victory that makes mornings bearable, the reward for careful fire management through the night. You stir the coals, expose their heat, add small pieces of kindling that catch quickly in the rekindled glow. The fire grows tentative at first, then more confident, flames rising where only embers remained. The warmth radiates outward. You feel it on your face and hands as you crouch before the hearth, tending the flames with practiced motions. The cabin begins to warm, the ice on the water bucket starting to soften at the edges. The worst of the night's chill retreating before the fire's advance. There is primal satisfaction in this moment, in watching fire push back cold, in knowing that you have once again commanded this ancient magic that makes human survival possible. Behind you, the family begins to stir. The children feel the returning warmth and shift in their sleep, perhaps pulling quilts closer for a few more minutes of rest, perhaps starting the slow process of waking. Your spouse mutters something, acknowledgement that you have risen to perform this morning duty. Gratitude expressed in the shorthand of long intimacy. The light continues to strengthen. What was gray becomes silver, and the silver takes on hints of color as the sun climbs toward the horizon. The world outside the cabin emerges from darkness, trees becoming visible, snow glowing faintly with the first reflected light. You cannot see this directly, the cabin's small openings revealing little, but you know it is happening, have seen it happen countless mornings. Can track the progress of dawn by the quality of light that reaches you. Breakfast will be simple. It is always simple in winter when supplies must be rationed to last until spring. Cornmeal mush, perhaps, or whatever bread was baked yesterday, warmed near the fire to make it more palatable. Tea, if you have it, if the trading post was not too expensive this year. Water if you do not. The meal will provide enough energy to begin the day's work. And that is all that can be asked. The children rise reluctantly, drawn from warmth by the demands of growing bodies, by the smells of cooking, if anything is cooking, by the voices of parents who cannot let them sleep indefinitely, however much rest they might need. They complain, as children always complain about mornings, but there is no real resistance. They know the rhythms of this life as well as you do. They know that day means work, that work cannot wait, that every hour of winter daylight is precious and must be used. The cabin fills with morning activity. Small feet on cold floor, voices exchanged, the ordinary sounds of a family beginning another day. The fire crackles and pops, fully established now, throwing heat that reaches every corner of the small space. Someone checks the water bucket, breaks through the crust of ice that remains, drinks the cold water that tastes somehow cleaner in winter, more vital. Outside, the world waits. The snow that fell during the night has added to what was already there. A fresh white layer covering old tracks and smoothing the landscape into unfamiliar shapes. The path to the woodpile will need to be the animals in their shelter will need tending. The endless cycle of winter maintenance will resume as soon as someone opens the door and steps into the cold that still dominates outside your walls. But for this moment, This brief pause between night's end and day's demands, there is something like peace. The fire burns, the family gathers, the light continues to grow. You have survived another night, and you will survive this day. And when darkness returns, you will face it again with whatever strength remains. This is the rhythm of frontier winter. Survival measured in nights endured, in fires maintained, in dawns achieved. There is no final victory, only the ongoing process of meeting each challenge as it comes, finding the strength to continue when continuation is all that is possible. But there is something noble in this persistence, something worth honoring even across the distance of centuries. The ordinary people who lived this life, who faced these nights and rose to these mornings. They demonstrated what humans are capable of when circumstances demand everything and offer little in return. The sun clears the horizon, though you cannot see it directly. Its light floods the world outside your walls, transforms the snow into brilliant white, makes shadows sharp and defined after the shadowless gray of early dawn. The day has properly begun. Whatever it holds, you will face it, and when it ends, when darkness returns, you will face that Section 11. Closing reflection, connecting past and present. Easing toward Sliptha, frontier cabins have long since returned to earth, their logs rotted, their fires cold. But something remains in stories, in memory, in the very human need for rest that connects you to those who struggled through frozen nights centuries ago. We have journeyed together through their darkness, felt something of their cold, understood a little of what they faced each night when the sun set and the temperature dropped, and there was nothing to do but endure until morning. You lie now in your own bed, in your own time, surrounded by comforts those frontier families could scarcely have imagined. The temperature around you is controlled, kept at whatever level you prefer, by systems that require no thought, no labor, no calculation of wood supplies against winter's duration. Your mattress is engineered for support and comfort, developed through research and manufacturing processes that transform sleep into something approaching science. Your blankets are chosen for aesthetics as much as function, pleasing to the eye as well as warm against your skin. You do not worry that wolves might approach your door. You do not listen for sounds that might indicate danger requiring response. You do not wake in the coldest hours to tend a fire that means the difference between survival and freezing. These concerns have been so thoroughly eliminated from modern life that they seem almost fictional, stories from a past too distant to touch us, and yet something connects you to those frontier sleepers. The basic human need for rest has not changed. The vulnerability of sleep, the surrender of consciousness to whatever the night might bring, remains as fundamental as it was 300 years ago. You close your eyes as they closed theirs. You drift into that mysterious state where the mind releases its grip on the world and allows something else to happen, something we still do not fully understand despite all our science and research. The settlers who developed elaborate bedtime rituals, who prayed and placed protective objects near their beds and interpreted their dreams for meaning. They understood something we sometimes forget in our comfortable modern lives. Sleep is not merely mechanical, not simply a biological process to be optimized for efficiency. Sleep is vulnerable. Sleep is an act of faith. Sleep requires trust that we will wake again, that the world will still be there, that our loved ones will still surround us when consciousness returns. Perhaps we might learn something from their approach, not the specific superstitions which belonged to their time and circumstances, but the underlying respect for sleep's importance, the recognition that how we prepare for rest matters, the understanding that the transition from waking to sleeping deserves attention, perhaps even ritual, rather than the abrupt collapse into bed that often characterizes modern nights. The frontier families who gathered for prayer before sleep were doing something psychologically sophisticated. Whatever we might think of their theological framework, they were marking the boundary between day and night, creating space for the mind to release the day's concerns, invoking something larger than themselves to hold whatever could not be resolved before morning. We might benefit from similar practices adapted to our own beliefs and circumstances. Think of the warmth around you now as a gift from all those who endured cold so that their children might eventually live differently. The comfort you experience tonight is the result of countless generations of human effort and ingenuity, building and inventing and improving, creating the conditions that allow you to take warmth for granted. This is not cause for guilt, but for gratitude, for recognition that your ease was purchased by others' struggle, that you are the beneficiary of history's long arc toward greater comfort. And think of those who still struggle, because the frontier conditions we explored tonight have not entirely vanished from the world. There are people tonight who are cold, who lack adequate shelter, who will not sleep well because basic needs are not met. The disparity between comfort and suffering continues, though its forms have changed. Perhaps remembering how difficult nights used to be for everyone might make us more compassionate toward those for whom nights remain difficult still. The wind that howled around frontier cabins still blows tonight, somewhere. The cold that threatened those families still threatens others. The human need for warmth, for safety, for rest remains constant across all times and places. We are connected to the past not just through genetics and culture, but through these basic needs that define what it means to be human. Let yourself drift now toward whatever rest this night offers you. The journey we have taken together is ending, but its echoes might stay with you, surfacing sometimes in moments of half-sleep when the past feels strangely present. The settlers who endured those frozen nights would have marveled at your circumstances. They would have blessed you with whatever blessings they knew how to give. They would have been glad that their struggles led eventually to a world where their descendants could sleep warm and safe. Rest well, traveler through history's quiet corners. Rest in the warmth that surrounds you. Rest in the safety that your ancestors could only dream of. And when you wake tomorrow, carry something of their determination with you into the day. Some small piece of the resilience that allowed them to rise from cold beds and face whatever challenges awaited. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey through the past. If these words have brought you some comfort, some perspective, some appreciation for what you have, then perhaps the frontier families we remembered tonight have accomplished something through us, have reached across the centuries to touch the present with their experience. Sleep well, wake refreshed, and return again sometime for another journey through history's peaceful corners. Another night spent in the company of those who came before. The fire burns low, the darkness gathers gently, and the most natural thing in the world, the soft fall into sleep's embrace, welcomes you home.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please subscribe and leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be as peaceful as a calm sea beneath a patient, turning light. Share.